Hello and welcome to today's webinar from Emergency Services Times. I'm Catherine Levin and I'm the editor of Emergency Services Times. After a very successful Emergency Services show, we now turn to talk about how we prepare our fire and rescue services for the next weather challenges with our partner MSA Safety. This webinar is a chat, it's no presentation or slides, but an opportunity to have a conversation that leaves you inspired to find out more. We've got a Q&A function on our webinar software today. You'll see that on the side of the screen. So do pop questions in there and we'll get to them as we go through our conversation. Try and keep them short if you can so that I can read them. We also get CPD accreditation for joining us today. You'll receive confirmation by email from us within a week or so. And if you're watching this on catch up, you'll get it after you've watched us. Our plan today is to run for 50 minutes in total. So let's get started. Bring our panel on screen. Hi everybody. I'm delighted to introduce you all to our panel. Saima, Nisar, Brook and Jim Davies. So Saima is a product line manager for MSA Safety. Ben is Chief Fire Officer for Warwickshire Fire and Rescue Service and Sustainability Lead for the National Fire Chiefs Council. And Jim is Assistant Chief Fire Officer for Bedfordshire Fire and Rescue Service. Welcome to you all. Now, we're going to start our webinar today by talking about the strategic context. So we're talking about weather, we're talking about fire and rescue services, we're talking about climate change, what difference does it make? I was looking at the Met Office and I decided to see if there was any interesting statistics. And it told me that the UK experienced a notably warm and sunny summer, while earlier in the year, all four nations recorded their warmest spring for mean temperature since records began in 1884. I think that's quite a stunning statistic. So our climate is changing, but what does that mean for our fire and rescue services? So I'm going to ask my panel, first of all, to tell me what they think and how much time are they spending thinking about climate change in their day-to-day work. So Saima, let's come to you first. How does it work at MSA Safety? You talk about climate change a lot.
Thank you, Catherine. So hello, everybody. So climate change, I think, is a complex topic. It creates different challenges which need to be addressed differently. It's just really unpredictable. On one hand, we're getting warmer with more wildfires. On the other hand, we're getting stormy, windy weather. So it's protecting from water and moisture on one side and then helping fight heat stress on the other side, and then doing this in comfortable PPE that needs to be worn for much longer periods. I definitely think this is placing a new responsibility on the fire services, both in the UK and also globally. However, to help here, MSA, we listen and observe from our customers just how important it is to develop solutions that are fit for purpose. We hear that general duty tasks versus structural fires are now considered to be only 7% of the working time. Therefore, developing PPE that's suitable for a range of applications from wildland firefighting to USAR has been a growing area of focus for MSA.
Yes, so it's clear that those changing climates are affecting you as a supplier, thinking about how you can respond to what the services are dealing with. So Jim, on the ground in Bedfordshire, I saw some stuff recently about flooding in your area and more than perhaps you're used to. So what does climate change look like for you in your service?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that it's only going in one direction, and over the last few years, we've definitely seen more sustained and prolonged incident types, whether that be the wet stuff or the really hot stuff. It's definitely making a big impact for us. So much so, we're already looking to review and bring forward our community risk management plan, and as a result of that, community risk analysis that will hopefully give us the data that will drive the direction for how the service is going to deal with it.
Good. I'm glad you've talked about data. We're going to come on to that in a moment. Before we do, so Ben, you have a national reference as well as yours within the Council of Warwickshire. Could you tell us a little bit about how much conversations you're having at climate, both within your council environment, which is different to how Bedfordshire is run, but also at that national level with the Chiefs Council?
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt. An afternoon, everyone. There's no doubt that climate is having a huge impact on the range and type of incidents that we're attending. I think the conversation is growing nationally in that space, which is really, really important. I think it's really important as well we don't get pulled into one particular incident type. So we can talk about wildfire, which we talk about a lot, I think, on a national basis. We talk quite a lot about flooding. It goes broader and deeper than that, though. So we know our communities, like fire discriminates against the most vulnerable, so is climate change going to discriminate against the most vulnerable in our communities, those with poor health, those with disabilities, those who are older, those who are living alone. That's the impact it's going to have. So I think we should talk about it broader and deeper, and that's what we're doing on a national level around actually what it means to whole society change. There could be much more migration of people having to live in different places in different parts of the country, and recognising there'll be vulnerabilities on that as well, because they'll be living in areas which perhaps are impacted even in the UK by these type of events. So it's a massive conversation for us at the moment, but I think it's only just beginning. And
does that conversation vary whether you're in your local environment or whether you're in your national world, or are you finding that it's the same thing happening both sides?
Yeah, so I think it's growing at a national level now. I think locally we are still probably looking on a shorter time horizon, the 3-4 year time horizons. So I think in perhaps a local level, we're looking at it more from a reactive response type elements that things are changing. We are very good at reacting to severe weather events that we're describing, I think, here. Severe weather events are different to long-term sustainable changes in our climate, which require a totally different approach in relation to PPE, equipment, risk, resource, capabilities. So I think it's growing legs, and the conversation is deeper and faster at a national level than it perhaps is at a local level.
Okay, and you have within National Fire Chiefs Council created a climate change statement.
Yes.
I'm questioning myself, so I can't quite remember what you said it was called. But do you want to tell us a little bit about how you kind of managed to capture that in a document and use that to help with kind of lobbying perhaps to government for more money, or locally with services themselves?
Yeah, so we've got a climate change position statement from the National Fire Chiefs Council. And what that does, it details through some of the impacts we think are going to come because of climate change. But like you say, a lot of it is a lobbying position, because we believe there needs to be some fundamental changes in how we're looking at data longer term, capital investment for fire and rescue services, looking at how we integrate the thinking cross-government as well. So climate change impacts are across government, whether it's MHCLG, Home Office, wherever it might be. It needs that sort of overarching cross-cutting look across government. We believe there's some changes needed to the Civil Contingencies Act as well, that enable and bring clarity around the roles and responsibilities through the LRF parties. There's elements of the built environment that are going to change here as well. So, buildings are going to overheat in particularly hot weather. There might be some stability issues around the foundations if soil changes due to wetting and warming of soil structures. And then there's that lobbying position around finance longer term for the fire and rescue sector in this space.
So you've come up with quite a big list there of things that are well beyond what we think of in terms of firefighters wearing kit in hot places or wet places. So it just shows the complexity of this space. But you've both referred to data. So in terms of whether the data that we hold about the weather that we predict, what do we know about in the past, how that's helping us to prepare. So Jim, we know that fire rescue services are using community risk management plans, and that within those you're using data to model where you think risk is and how you think you should be spending the finite resources that you have. Should those plans still be 3 years?
I guess there are different views, Catherine. I think if you look at the long-term sort of prediction of what it's going to do, it's definitely going to be in one direction. Unfortunately, what we are kind of, as any public service is, it's bound by, and that's the political cycle of governments. It's the comprehensive spending reviews. It's the medium-term financial planning, and the funding security that we've received. That you're trying to balance constantly, really balance your risk and demand against finance. So I think there's arguably the volatility that we see in the changing of the risk profile, both with the conflicts abroad to financial insecurities of cyber issues, etc. So whatever a community risk management plan needs to look like, I think needs to be able to flex and be agile enough to cope with those kind of levels of volatility. And I think that can be predicted to some degree, but we definitely will need to remain agile enough to be able to cope with relatively quick changes to those things I just mentioned.
Yeah, so maybe the old model of take a CRMP, you consult on it, you have it for 3 years, you consult on it, you have it for 3 years. Maybe that just isn't quite going to work anymore. So Ben, we talked in the planning for this about whether actually the trajectory should be much longer, but I'm not sure a local authority would want to have a plan that was going 10, 20, 30 years in the future, but should it have that element to it, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting and useful comments from Jim around the volatile world in which we're living in, and that sort of need to make sure we can adapt and move quickly when things change. However, I think one of the things that is difficult for the sector is around that lack of long-term direction and planning. So I think they both can go together, actually. I don't think they're in conflict to each other. You can have that short-term agile planning CRMP type approach, but then I think we do need something 20 to 40 years that looks on that sort of time horizon. And I know, Catherine, you mentioned that would be difficult in some of our political structures or our governance models. I actually think it'd be really helpful because it would cross-cut political cycles, it would cross-cut financial cycles, and would give the sector a level of stability and direction of travel through that volatility. And that might be really helpful for the sector, especially if it's built upon community resilience and these other elements. That might be quite powerful. And it only really echoes the national approach. So nationally, there's the chronic risk assessment, which is a 20 to 40 year horizon. And then there's the national risk register, which is much more acute, looking at the shorter term aspects. So most people at a national level who look at risk, they look at it in those two horizons, short and long term. And I think we as a sector would value doing that.
Okay, so Sam, you've heard how it sort of feels with a fire and rescue service, both locally and nationally, the kind of view on data and predicting where we should go. In terms of you as a company, where are your thoughts when it comes to data and helping you plan for the future?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, we do look at data, and some we picked up recently was showing that in the UK and Europe, for example, road traffic accidents make up 87% of the most common call-out incident. And as we've mentioned, weather patterns are changing. So we have a wetter climate prone to flash flooding or a lot more wildland fires. We also have seen data that indicates key purchase requirements for PPE are always the net comfort, and it's mentioned more frequently than any other purchasing criteria. So, if we looked at data such as that, and we've designed like a first technical rescue suit called the MSA Bristol Rescue Stretch, and it uses a Gore-Tex technology cross-deck PIRAD. And then this combination, it has multiple technologies designed for the many unique requirements of such events. It's lightweight, stretched, but it's also waterproof, breathable, and comfortable. So it protects from rescue incident hazards like chemicals and sudden incidental flash fires from that could happen in such a vehicle incident such as that. So we really look at the data and try and build product that is designed to, cover all of those challenges if we can.
Yes. Okay. So very different perspectives on data then, but all around improving the experience of the firefighter, because we want to look after them, want to make sure that they're working in a way. You talked about comfort there. I just wonder in terms of thinking about mitigation, so what fire and rescue services can do to address the causes of climate change. Jim, you talked about money and about how, with the limited money that fire and rescue services have, how are they able to reduce their own carbon footprint so they're not contributing themselves to climate change? What sort of work are you doing in your service to reduce your carbon footprint?
Yeah, so as you say, it's been problematic. Historically, capital funding was taken from the Home Office through capital grants back in 2014-15. That kind of stopped. And now there's a lot of onus, for fire and rescue services, either get it through local authority contributions, government grants, or some kind of financial reserves. But these are becoming less and less, which is causing problems. The advancement of EVs and electric vehicles and charging stations, there's a real balance, and we are just putting together a sustainable strategy of our own around our estates. But as I've kind of already mentioned, that level of volatility at the moment, particularly in Bedfordshire, is going through some exponential change in its risk profile, with a new introduction of a theme park from Universal Resort that's going to be going in. A huge town being built on the eastern side of Bedfordshire called Tempsford, and that's going to be larger than Oxford and Cambridge combined in the next 20 years. All of this is makes it quite volatile, and funding that's needed now in order to be sort of primed into the system that allows us to be match fit and ready for these really large infrastructures. So I think it's a continued problem for most fire and rescue services, and I don't think it's a silver bullet or magic wand we can wave right now.
I wonder, it just makes me think about social value and the sort of percentages of contracts that need to be spent on green things, thinking about suppliers with strong ESG credentials. So those people you've talked about in terms of developing the new town, which sounds huge, I didn't realise it was going to be that big, and your Universal Studios, which is fascinating to see that coming into your area. Do you think any of the impacts of that would actually have positive effects in terms of the delivery of public services, so they have to put money in through the SIL process or whatever that means? Actually might provide funding for you to do things which can help you to mitigate? Or is that
that's what we are working really hard to achieve right now. Yes, access to the 106 funding, so funding from contractors and housing companies that will start to enable us to update and renew our capital estate. That is slow progress, and as I say, the lag between to build a new fire station realistically in a brand new environment takes 4 to 5 years. That's the same time frame that Universal will be opening their first store. So there is this need for finance right now. Once they're in and are established, and you start to see the benefits of business rates, council tax through precepts, it has a very different look and a very different picture. But unfortunately, the investment needs to happen now, and that curve is somewhat away, unfortunately.
Yeah, because capital funding's not part of your settlement now, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. That's
so the lobbying, I think there was lobbying from National Fire Chiefs Council to try and bring that back into the funding settlement. So Ben, in terms of your authority, what are you doing in terms of trying to reduce your carbon footprint? And are you benefiting from things like the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund? Have you used that at all?
Yeah, so we have. So I totally agree with Jim. There's this need for this upfront capital, and it's almost like a really difficult sort of chicken and the egg type thing, because you can save money by investing in green technology, but you need an upfront capital investment to achieve that. So it's that type of cyclical challenge. However, we have done things like LED lighting throughout some of our locations, better windows, better insulation. And we've done some of that through the funding you referenced there, Catherine. So I think the important thing here is, can all fire and rescue services do something? Absolutely. However, that doesn't take away the capital investment challenges, particularly when alternative green technology tends to be more expensive up front. And then we're also having to make sure we don't lose any of our statutory duty and responsibilities at the same time. And there's no national capital. However, I don't think it's an excuse to do nothing. I think everyone in the sector can look at, like I said, LED technology, insulation, less vehicle movements in different ways, the use of buildings. There are a range of things you can do. So I don't think people should use that as an excuse.
Yes. So in terms of, it's interesting to talk about thinking about journeys. So this idea of PPE being in a fire station, personal issue, you have it, it's there, and if somebody else needs that, you've got to stock how you move that around, how you're using cars to move things, stock around. In terms of MSA, Saima, you able to offer different services to fire rescue services now, so that they can have a sort of more flexible way of moving things around their estates rather than being a totally personal issue. So that's something that helps in terms of reducing carbon footprints.
Yes, electric transportation, really, to move when we are servicing our garments, and how we can help is to make sure that any transportation that we are aiding with, that we can that it's sustainable, it's using EV technology. So yeah, I think from MSA's side, that's where we can really help.
So let's talk about the kit then. So we've made a few references to it. So this idea that every firefighter is seen in a photograph that I ever see in structural fire kit. But I am sure that structural fire kit is not needed for every single task that they do. But how practical is it to have lots of different kit in different places? And the mobility thing we just talked about there. So in terms of the response that you're making to this problem around needing to be more agile and adaptive, Saima, are you seeing that services are now starting to say, actually, we'll have structural kit, we'll have wildfire kit, we'll have flooding kit? Is it like that, or is it, how does that look from a sort of demand point of view at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean, what do we have here? We've got, we're looking for water protection from one side, and then we're also looking to fight heat stress from other, as we kind of look at the climatic changes. So it's really becoming tougher to address both with the same kit. However, if I use an example that we have here at MSA, we've got a fire helmet. We've got the Galley F2XR helmet, which is a fit for purpose solution. So just like how fit for duty clothing is tailored to meet the demands of both rescue professionals or wildland firefighting, it's a compact helmet designed for versatility across 5 standards. So the one helmet, basically we've got 2 for rescue standards, 1 for wildland, and then 1 each for tech rescue and climbing. So you've got the one helmet with 5 standards underneath it. So they've not got multiple PPE that they're having to be kitted out with and transport around. So we've also developed a 2-in-1 solution, the X4 Technical Rescue Wildland. Again, this is dual certified. It can be used for both tech rescue and wildland, for example. So, we're looking at these multi-norm PPE so that, one item can fit different standards.
That sounds like it might be music to your ears, Jim and Ben, this idea of one thing fits many purposes. Is that the direction of travel now in services?
I think it's going to continue to need to be. I think, having 5 sets of fire kit is pretty unrealistic, particularly as we are going towards, smaller fire and rescue, fire appliances, due to the way Bedfordshire is growing. More the roads are busier, parking's more problematic, particularly in areas like Luton and Bedford. So yeah, having that ability to multitask with PPE is going to be a real benefit.
And this is one of the challenges for the sector around how we move forward, linked to our community risk management plans against the changing risk and vulnerability, around the concept of a firefighter doing absolutely everything is going to be challenging. So, certainly in rural areas, you rely on a fire engine being able to be deployed to any type of incident type with the right PPE. At which point, I think this PPE solution is fantastic. In other areas, where do you balance the specialist type capabilities for new and emerging risks versus the universal offer with someone being able to do everything, because as a reality, that's really difficult. That's really difficult to achieve. So I think that's going to be a dilemma for the sector into the future, and I haven't got the answer to it. It's really a question around how do we balance this need for different equipment, different PPE. But can everyone do that and everyone be deployed in the same way, or do we need specialist versus a universal capability? And what does that look and feel like for the future?
Sounds to me like you're completely upending the model of how the fire service works then, because at the moment you have a fire station with fire engines, firefighters, and a control room, and you have 999, and all of that kind of works together, and off you go. But if you're saying that actually you're going to have a flooding incident that's dealt with differently to a wildfire, which is different to a house fire, then can that all happen with that structure in place?
So I think it will need to look different into the future. I think that is true, and this is where fire sector reform is required. With new and emerging risks, we can't accept that the same model will continue to work for us into the future. And I think that's really exciting, actually, to look at how there's a range of different firefighters already with different levels of skill sets across our sector. That's really exciting because everyone has a role to play, but we probably just need to understand what that looks and feels like into the future. And it can't be the same. We're quite wedded and to doing the same things.
Yeah, so when you bring in your new recruits, you've got a training school of 10, 12, 16 new recruits. They're going through a training which is all about structural firefighting. They don't specialise until later. I think that's right. So should the specialisms be brought in earlier in terms of the training regime to allow people to go off in that direction, or should they always have this fundamental core of firefighting?
So my gut feel is there's a fundamental core that people need to know and understand, so you can deploy them flexibly. So I think that is the right model. It'd be interesting to get Jim's view on that, but I think that is the right model. But then I do think, certainly in things like the on-call model, could you have a more specialist response to flood, not being required to have BA and other competencies, and the impact that has on their training and other elements to make the on-call model more sustainable in that way? I think that's quite an exciting thought process you can go through. But I think my starting position would be that firefighters should be trained in the core basics of a firefighter, but then could that be seen differently in different places in different ways, not having to maintain the whole suite of competencies depending on the role they undertake?
Yeah. So Jim, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a great point. If you look at the challenges of particularly those rural services where there's a real reliance on call, and its sustainability, given the changes to society and local industry becoming less and less, which makes it quite problematic for employment for on call in certain areas. As well as then the complexities of the role. It technically is very complex now compared to what it would have been 10 or 15 years ago. And as a result of that, we're seeing competency requirements grow exponentially, which is always a challenge when you've got effectively 96 hours a year to train an on-call firefighter. Then there's a balance of how many hours can an on-call firefighter actually give in relation to keeping their home work-life balance. It's a bit of a macro problem right now, and so I think Ben's suggestion of smaller roles would help facilitate that. I guess the only sort of sticking point we have for that, and that's that demand curve. You're constantly trying to balance, demand with risk, and unfortunately, we're not having floods 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So it's constantly trying to blend, your resource to demand. And again, coming back to that data, I think it's going to be key. There's a piece of work going on nationally at the moment around trying to align some national data sets for CRMP or CRAs. But I think the key to that is understanding I guess your demographical, your geographical, your chronological, and your metrological, which gives a much better understanding of who you're going to, where you're going to the map, when that might be, and why you're going. So I think there's definitely a need for change. I guess we're just probably at the beginning of that curve.
So Saima, we're talking there about the changing role for firefighters. So if we're talking about on-call versus those who are doing this as a full-time job, when you're talking to customers, do they distinguish between those staff that they have as on-call and those that they have as permanent? Or to you, is it they're all equal?
I think for us, they're all equal. And when we're taking it, we look at it as one voice of the customer for our fire and rescue services. I mean, for example, when we trial our product using the training scenarios, as our product is under development, getting this valuable free feedback goes back into developing the right PPE and taking all consideration. So yeah, for us, it's just one voice as we take that back.
Yeah. And in terms of the data that you get from the sort of physiological studies that you do when people are testing the kit out, are you finding different data from different types of firefighting experience?
Yeah, I mean, we've taken a look at ergonomics, for example. We know that lightweight garments, reducing heat stress, developing stretch materials, it really allows for flexibility, which helps the firefighters to work comfortably longer periods in whichever scenario you're talking about, whether it's a wildfire or a rescue situation. So, we really kind of take care of looking at all of these aspects into consideration to developing back the right products.
Yes. And so to Jim and Ben, for people who don't know much about working in fire services, when you have members of staff who are day-to-day using their kit, what's their opportunity for giving you feedback to talk about the kind of things that we've been talking about here in terms of how they're finding it, being, dealing with wildfires where you're outside in hot environments, hot smoky environments, you're not in a building, you're not near your fire station. How do they sort of feed that back into you so that you can take that experience right from the front line? How does that work? Jim, perhaps start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think fire and rescue services for some time now is it's had a quite a positive journey in assurance and learning, and most fire and rescue services now comply with the fire standard of operational learning. We're just seeing that starting to widen into organisational learning, and I think that's where we're going to see a much broader range of causation, and I think that will really be beneficial in addressing not just the operational need, but actually things like prevention and protection, and how we can inform that. But we have a really robust operational learning and assurance process that enables that to happen. We also align that with thematic reviews, so that if we see a feedback or trends starting to grow in, say, flood incidents or extreme weather in high temperatures, that's pretty much what we saw during the sort of 23-24 years of that actually the traditional firefighting PPE was just not fit for purpose, given the sustained length of time we saw those temperatures so high for. I think there's a real place now for organisational learning to take this and start to look at that much longer period that Ben talked about right at the beginning. If we get our data sets start aligning to really start to talk to one another, that picture becomes clearer and clearer. And I think the advancement in AI now will give us much clearer pictures and predictive patterns a lot quicker than we've seen previously.
And just before I bring Ben in terms of that data sharing, so there's 44 services now in England. You're collecting your data, learning from incidents and so forth. Where do you put all that data so that it can be centrally seen and get that kind of total view rather than simply a local view?
Yeah,
is that through the tool that you've just mentioned, or is there another way of doing it?
Yes, so it's the each fire and rescue service feeds into the NFCC central team, and they collect that data and they create the data trends, I guess, in what it's seeing. And I think that's certainly an area that I think we see where flooding causes issues, extreme temperatures and heat causes issues, and I think this is where we now start working with our partners and some of the suppliers to look at how we deal with some of the issues that we're starting to see as trends.
Yeah, so Ben, in terms of your service, how are you doing something similar to Jim in terms of how you're feeding that information in from the front line to make sure that it's feeding into that long-term view that Jim set out?
Yeah, exactly the same, Catherine. So we all follow into the national processes around organisational learning. I'm the deputy chair of the organisational learning group as well. So we absolutely do feed into that space. I think the only thing I'd add is that it's a really challenging area. I think this is where, let's say you've got a PPE contract for a number of years and you're tied into that for a number of years and you're getting feedback of it needing to change, then we know it meets the health and safety and the requirements of our firefighters for the moment, and that's fantastic. But there's a reality, you can't really respond and react to that debrief feedback, that organisational learning that's flowing through particularly quickly. So that might be something that needs consideration for the future, and I think links to Jim's point about the need for an agile short-term look versus a long-term perspective as well. And that's a challenge for us because you can get feedback through organisational learning that we need wildfire PPE or whatever it might be. But if you're in a contractual arrangement for a number of years, you can't necessarily react and respond to that. Which is one of our challenges around procurement, I guess. It's the same with vehicles. You have a 14 to 15 year life of a fire engine and you're tied with that. So you look at that and actually that procurement framework is a real challenge, I think.
Does that sound familiar, Saima, in terms of what services are saying they're finding out now, but they're within a procurement environment which they're not able to change? So how do you as a supplier adapt to something like that?
Yeah, I think we're responding certainly again, as I say, for developing our products to meet we're following data as ourselves in order to develop our products, listen to the firefighters through VOC. A lot of this feedback is going back into how we develop our product to make sure that it is, as I mentioned, multi-norm and to meet multiple challenges as well. But just try and be ahead of the data curve ourselves and understand what are the needs of the firefighters so that we can be ahead of developing the right kit for them at the time. And having that understanding that there are challenges for procurement from their side as well, so that from our side we need to be responsive in making sure that the products are already capable of meeting those challenges that the firefighters require. So I think from our side we need to do that.
Okay, and I think this is the year in which the National Fire Council is refreshing the PPE framework. So the timing is good in terms of all that listening and adapting to happen. So let's just widen this out slightly. So we talked about the changing role of the firefighters, but of course, in order to work in your locality, you work with others. You don't work by yourselves. So we have mentioned the Local Resilience Forum and this idea of whole of society. So if we're responding to climate change, it's not a one service only that's going to respond. So in terms of the work that you're doing at a national level, Ben, you have your position statement, you have your working group and improvement committee within the National Fire Council. How does that then tap in at a national level across to the whole of society work, the Resilience Action Plan, the work we see coming out of Cabinet Office? How is fire contributing at that level? And then perhaps we'll look at the local level as well.
Yes, we're certainly feeding into the refresh of the Civil Contingencies Act, to the future role of local resilience forums into the future. I know that many chief fire officers now chairing local resilience forums. So echoing what you've said, really, Catherine, I fundamentally believe that the ability to prevent, mitigate, adapt, and respond to climate-related incidents, events, has to be a whole society approach. It has to be around community resilience. That's a term that hasn't really been defined well enough, I don't think. So we're certainly working on a national basis around how do we define what we mean when we say community resilience. What does that look and feel like? The role of the LRF through multi-partner agency approaches to removing this risk. The risks associated with climate change are too complex and too deep to be dealt with by one agency. So we are absolutely working at a national level to bring partners together. We're certainly working closely with the National Police Chiefs Council and also Nottingham Trent University in some research in that space as well. So I think it needs to be broader and deep, and it's a big piece of work.
You mentioned the Civil Contingencies Act. What are the changes that you're seeking to achieve?
So I think it needs to define roles and responsibilities much more clearly, certainly in relation to fire and rescue services. For us, that's obviously our perspective and our lens. I'm sure others might feel the same. So I think it's clarifying roles, responsibilities, and the competencies required to undertake those roles. Currently, being a chair of a local resilience forum, which I am here in Warwickshire, I co-chair it with the Chief Constable here. There's no training, there's no competency framework. It's a role that you pick up and you do best endeavours based on your skill set as a senior leader within the sector to deliver against. That's not okay. That's not okay for the future. We need to have much better, more defined roles set out in legislation, and with a competency framework sitting beneath that.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I understand that the idea of a chief resilience officer is being resurrected, because it was into the previous government, kind of disappeared for a bit. That might come back. Is that going to be in your area? You're going to be one of the pilot areas, so seeing it locally there for you, Jim?
So we're not one of the pilot areas. No, my understanding is the pilots may be paused, Jim. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, I think so.
So it's not actually happening at all then at the moment, this idea of the CRO? Who would be the professional, who would be the one who would be organising, managing it in the area, rather than, as you say, people taking it on as an additional role?
Yeah, I don't think it's disappeared as a concept. My understanding is perhaps there are multiple competing pressures at the moment, so it's sort of on pause, but it's certainly, I would argue, a position. But I think as a fire and rescue sector, we should be ready to undertake that role. I think it is a role that sits well with fire and rescue services. We are well positioned to provide a much broader and deeper role in relation to resilience and to take a more of a front seat within local resilience forums. That's a personal view.
Yes. Jim, thoughts on that from a local level in Bedfordshire? What does your LRF look like? What kind of conversations are you having?
Yeah, very similar to Ben. Say Andy, our chief, he chairs our local resilience forum too. I think COVID taught us a lot, and our multi-agency partners, we really stepped up during that period, and I think that continues. We very much take the lead. In Bedfordshire, we facilitate and manage the local resilience forum, and its command support function is, the strategic command support. So that's about pulling the partners in during, those acute moments, setting up TCG, tactical coordinating groups, strategic coordinating groups, and we facilitate that. But I do think it's not just about the response element of this. This very much is about, leans into what Ben is saying, and that's taking the lead around a much broader safety management, outlook, and we've historically managed risk well. I would say I think that played out very well during COVID. We responded probably where other services, and I don't wish this to mean a detriment, it's just that we're familiar with working dynamically to risk. And I think there was some services and agencies that just couldn't, react as quite as quickly as we did. So I think there's a lot of lessons there, particularly around effective safety management structures and methodologies. And I think the future is really bright for fire in that space.
Okay, so I feel we could talk about resilience for a long time, but unfortunately we only have 5 or 6 minutes left. But I am interested, you talk about complex and deep, Ben. It's clear from this conversation that there is an awful lot. You start with the idea of the concept of climate change, but then you start to look at it in these different ways. It is complex. There's a lot to it, from the PPE that people are wearing right the way through to this is long-term planning, and the partners. There's a lot going on. So what I'd like to do now, before I bring us to a close, is to ask something around if we wanted someone to go away from this conversation, which has been quite wide-ranging, what would the thing you'd like to go and talk about? So what would the one piece of advice be? So Saima, in terms of what you've heard from our conversation today, what would you like people to think about in terms of climate change and the nature of fire and rescue services going forward? What should they be thinking about?
So I'd say the best place is to start talking to the right people. Have a chat with your national PPE rep, your procurement team, or your local station managers. It's not just about choosing the right kit for the job. It's about understanding what your service can actually support. Things like stowage, washing, budget, they all come into play. Also, make sure you're speaking to your authorities reps for the dedicated teams, whether that's the USAR, the Rescue the Wildfire, or any other specialist area, because their needs and experiences can be quite different. And then just don't be afraid to be the change maker. Speak up, be informed, and get involved in the conversation. Reach out to PPE manufacturers and connect with other services or authorities. You know, many of them will be all going through the same changes.
I like the idea of being the change maker. That's great. Thank you, Saima. Ben, how about you? What's your one piece of advice for our listeners?
So I think for me, Catherine, it'd be an ask really. So I think there's a huge amount of work going on around people gathering the data, the information around the impacts of climate change into the future, but it's disparate. It's in different parts of the sector and broader suppliers and broader than that even. So I think we're going to make a real difference. We need to come together and understand this together.
And you have that national role, so that's in your gift.
Yes, hopefully.
Great, thank you. And Jim, what's your one piece of advice for people today?
I guess it would be, going back to that kind of whole of society approach to civil resilience and following the government's approach to it. Prevention and is rather, is much better than the cure itself, and a greater emphasis, I think, on preparation and prevention work to prepare society for, I think, what's about to come over the hill.
That sounds quite do like a real gloomy doomy sort of thing. But in terms of the resilience action plan, is there anything in there you'd kind of point to say, actually go check that out? That's where you should be looking. Is there anything in there you'd point towards?
If you have a look at anyone, just have a little Google on the UK government's website around civil resilience, there's some fantastic support and guidance around how you can build better civil resilience in your fire and rescue services and local resilience forums. I think for me it's a whole society approach. I don't think we can now sort of still have the fundamental kind of principle of we can make people safe. I think we can help make people safer, but I think going forward this needs to be a much greater scale, macro scale of society saying actually we need to all come together to make this better, because there will be a point in time where extreme weather will get the better of us.
I think you're right, and it's interesting to end on the whole of society concept. I write about that a lot in Emergency Services Times, and it's often seen as a resilience subject, which is separate to fire, police, ambulance, but actually it's all of us, it's all the organisations, all the considerations happening. So thank you for the advice. So we started with Saima saying about being a change maker. I think that's right, about being brave, having those conversations. It's the perfect time for our risk services to be doing that in terms of the procurement that's going on. About data, disparate data, so bring it all together. So Ben, that's your job to sort that one out. So people will come to you and say you could sort my data out. And Jim, in terms of that whole of society thinking a bit bigger, I think is a good point. So thank you so much to you all for the conversation this afternoon. I'm afraid 50 minutes does whiz by. We could have talked for ages. We didn't talk at all about decontamination and the whole issue around contaminants and firefighter cancer or anything like that. So I would like to, but we just don't have enough time for that. So I'd just like to thank you very much for joining me this afternoon before I come to my closing words. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Thank you to my speakers. The webinar will be available to watch on catch up via our website. Any notes on the webinar will be hosted there too. So I might just put in the resilience action plan. We've talked to that quite a few times today. You'll receive CPD accreditation by email. And if you're watching on catch up, you'll get this as well, but probably around the end of the month. Our next webinar is on the 6th of November, where we'll be looking at policing protest and how technology improves communication and situational awareness. We are now on a whole series running through till Christmas of webinars, so you can catch us every Thursday, apart from next week's, it's half term. So do join us by reading our website, emergencyservicestimes.com, and sign up for our weekly digest. In fact, we don't have a weekly one, that we daily one. I must update my notes. So daily digest. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much for watching.